Rules Committee will come to order, and thank you very much for joining us this afternoon at the Rules Committee. Today, the committee will consider H.R. 1004, the Regulatory Integrity Act of 2017, as well as H.R. 1009, OIRA Insight Reform and Accountability Act. Every year, federal agencies promulgate thousands of new regulations and impose billions of dollars in regulatory cost on the American public. In issuing those new regulations, agencies are required to go through a period of notice and comment, which allows the public a chance to review proposed rules and to offer comments back to the agency. This is known as a comment period. Unfortunately, this process is being blatantly abused. For example, after issuing its Waters of the United States proposed rule called WOTUS, the EPA undertook a public campaign to solicit support for what they were claiming was just a proposed rule. H.R. 1004 provides transparency into the proposed rule process by requiring agencies to post in a central location all the public comments that are issued during the proposed rule stage. This bill prohibits agencies from actively soliciting support for what should be considered a proposed rule to the public for regulatory action and not a final product. The committee will also consider the OIRA Insight, Reform, and Accountability Act legislation to require the administration of the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs to review regulations. H.R. 1009 codifies and expands Executive Order 12866, granting the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs statutory authority to conduct regulatory review authority that cannot be rescinded or limited by future presidents. Between 2006 and 2015, agencies published over 36,000 final rules, of which 555 were considered economically significant, indicating an anticipated offset on the economy of more than $100 billion or more. This legislation, I think, benefits every American by ensuring OIRA will continue to review significant regulatory action to ensure agencies consider alternatives to regulating, to contemplate alternatives and forms of regulations to accomplish these issues, as well as a cost-benefit analysis. I'd like to welcome the author of H.R. 1009, Congressman Paul Mitchell, to the panel, as well as the gentleman from Virginia, Congressman Conley, who is, in my opinion, well-schooled in these issues that come before the committee. We have these two bills under consideration today, and I invite each of you to speak on H.R. 1004 and H.R. 1009. I hope that you will, if you give your testimony, allude to each one of those as you're in reference to them in your opening statements and comments afterwards. Please be advised that anything you have writing without objection will be entered the record. We're delighted that you're here today, and I would defer to the gentleman, the ranking member, the judge from Florida. Judge?
Chairman, I have no opening statement and welcome our witnesses and look forward to their testimony.
Thank you very much. We're delighted that you're both here. Paul, you've been up here before. Once before. Yes, sir. And we're delighted that you're here. The gentleman serves as a member of the Republican leadership team. I'm quite honestly delighted in meeting you and knowing you and believe you bring a business background to Congress, which I came to Congress a few years ago with one also, and I think it's tried to help me as I not only analyze bills, but see what the future holds as an opportunity to grow our economy. We're delighted that you're here. The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for the entire Rules Committee for taking time today. I appreciate you holding the hearing, and I request a structured rule for consideration of H.R. 1009, the OIRA Insight and Reform and Accountability Act. That's quite an acronym, by the way. And H.R. 1004, the Regulatory Integrity Act of 2017, sponsored by my colleague and fellow Michigan member Tim Walberg. Every year, agencies promulgate thousands of new regulations and impose billions of dollars in regulatory costs on the American public. H.R. 1009 and H.R. 1004 establish requirements to ensure transparency and accountability in our regulatory system. The Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, commonly called OIRA, if you can get the acronym right, serves as a check on the agencies to ensure that they are working together to avoid duplicate and unnecessary overlap of regulations. As the body that reviews regulations across agencies, OIRA is uniquely positioned to eliminate redundant regulation coming from different federal agencies. Regulatory accumulation has considerable impact on our economy. Our Mercatus study cited that if the regulations had been held at constant levels observed in 1980, the United States economy would have been 25% larger than it is as of 2012. Regulations can be particularly burdensome on small businesses that cannot afford the legal staff and advice that many large businesses can. It also creates significant barriers to entry in many industries. We must address this burdensome regulatory regime. OIRA should function as an essential defense against regulatory overreach by overseeing federal agencies. Executive Order 12866, as the Chairman referenced, established OIRA's regulatory overview authority. President Clinton issued that executive order in 1993. President Obama reaffirmed that executive order in 2009. The original structure was put in place by President Reagan. OIRA existing authorities under the executive order is an area of bipartisan agreement, or at least has been. H.R. 1009 puts into statute the basic structure that has existed for more than 2 decades, with some minor amendments for transparency, accountability. The bill improves upon the governing authority of 1286 that was established by President Clinton. The bill requires OIRA produce a written report on its review of legal requirements. This will allow the public to understand what OIRA is doing and whether the agency has adequately met the rulemaking authorities and requirements. The legislation also requires the agencies provide OIRA with a red line of any changes that the agency chooses to make during the review process. This allows the public to better understand how centralized review can improve the quality of rulemaking. It also extends the requirement for regulatory review to independent regulatory agencies. Independent agencies have not been required to submit their regulations for review by OIRA, but there is many reasons to believe why these agencies would not be subject to the same requirements as others. It does not make any sense, frankly. Experts, including OIRA administrators and American Bar Associations, have repeatedly called for the inclusion of independent agencies in OIRA review. Another important part of the regulatory process is public participation. The notice and comment process for proposed regulations is a primary public participation requirement for agencies. Essentially, in issuing new regulations, agencies must provide notice of the regulation and accept comments before the public before finalizing it. The process is enshrined in law, not for the purpose of setting a bare minimum compliance, but to obtain information from the public. The process is enshrined in law to ensure agencies have as much information about the potential effects and conflicts of a regulation prior to finalizing it and imposing those responsibilities and burdens on the public. Often regulated entities and small businesses and subject matter experts can provide insights and new perspectives that should be taken into consideration by agencies. However, not every agency takes this opportunity to listen to the public. Often agencies develop proposed regulations and assume it's the end of the story. In effect, agencies reduce the notice and comment period to a compliance exercise, an academic exercise, and a paperwork process. We saw this with Waters of the U.S., as the Chairman notes. EPA engaged in troubling behavior that indicated the agency was not actually listening to the public, but rather advocating. EPA issued an online social media platform to disseminate what appeared to be non-EPA affiliated messages to encourage the public to provide positive comments, not to encourage comments, to actually generate positive comments. The goal was clearly to pad the administrative record with positive feedback from members of the public who wanted to comment and rightly say that clean water is important to me. But of course, all comments are important. All perspectives are important. We do not want EPA to impose ambiguous and poorly drafted regulations. We also don't want them to gin up comments for the sake of looking like they've done their job. H.R. 1004, the Regulatory Integrity Act of 2017, works to eliminate that problem. It places reasonable restrictions on how federal agencies communicate about pending regulatory actions. It also includes transparency requirements. With every increasing regulatory burden, Congress needs transparency in the regulatory process at all steps to determine whether agencies are appropriately communicating with the public, whether they're advocating action or they're regulating. The Regulatory Integrity Act previously received support from Congress, and last Congress passed the floor by a recorded vote of 250 to 171. I thank Congressman Wahlberg for his leadership on this issue. The Committee on Oversight and Government Reform approved the Regulatory Integrity Act of 2017 on February 14 without amendment by a vote of 22-16. The committee also approved the OIRA Integrity Reform and Accountability Act on February 14 without amendment by a vote of 23-16. I thank you all for the opportunity to speak in support of both. I urge your support for the rule and welcome any questions. Thank you.
Mr. Mitchell, thank you very much. Very succinct, and we appreciate the conversation. Jerry, welcome back to the Rules Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We're delighted that you're here. I must be blunt, the last 2 or 3 times you've been here, you've been most thoughtful, articulate, and I think engaged this committee in the way that we appreciate and respect it. The gentleman's recognized.
You're most kind. Thank you,
Yes,
Mr. Chairman.
I was surprised that was Jerry you were talking about.
Well, we didn't put it to a vote, Louise. Nor was I in reference to the first 15 times he was up. Only the last 2 or 3, so. So I'm, you know, she'll have minority report here out pretty soon.
Apparently, yeah.
Before we get that, Jerry, I'm delighted that you're here. The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr.
Yes, sir.
Chairman.
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Chairman, you did cite my friend's private sector experience. I, just for the record, spent 20 years in the private sector as a corporate vice president
good. That's
before
good.
coming here to Congress.
And by the way, Louise is one of your biggest fans, and you know that, and that's why, I know that, but I had to make
And
sure
I
we have.
hers.
We have a lot of audience that's
And
out
I
there.
hers.
There's no bigger supporter than you have. We admire you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sessions. I really appreciate it, and appreciate the work all of you do. It's unsung work, and I know how hard all of you work and how long the hours are on this committee. And I and so many of my colleagues admire what you do on a bipartisan basis. Let me first address H.R. 1004, the Regulatory Integrity Act. I believe we can all agree that rulemaking process needs to be more transparent. This bill, however, actually could reduce transparency. It's too broad, vague, and actually threatens to stifle agency openness with the public by suddenly calling something advocacy or promotion that could be construed as simple explanatory activity so the public has a better idea of what's being contemplated. The bill would prohibit federal agencies from making any public communications that directly advocate for the submission of public comments or expert analysis of a pending rule. Agencies also would be prohibited from appealing to the public to advocate in support of or against a pending rule and from communicating for publicity or propaganda purposes. It's hard to believe that an agency could say anything about a pending rule that might not fall into one of these broad categories. It's critical for regulated industry, members of the public, localities, to be able to hear from agencies the rationale, the logic, and the science behind why a proposed rule or regulation is purported to be beneficial without subjecting that agency or those personnel to the possibility of breaking the law. The increased secrecy imposed by this bill, in my view, is unnecessary and potentially injurious to the public interest. There's already a statute in place that prevents agency employees from engaging in grassroots lobbying for a proposed rule. That's the law. The Appropriations Committee also typically includes language in their bills that prevents agencies from using federal funds for, quote, publicity or propaganda purposes. This bill goes beyond those existing restrictions and would have a chilling effect on agency communications and leave the public less informed. The bill also includes a number of burdensome requirements. Agencies would be required, for example, to list online the date, intended audience, method of communication, and content of every public communication. The bill defines public communication to include every oral, written, or electronic communication, and even documents published in the Federal Register if they do not fall within one narrow exception for rulemaking publications. In other words, the bill would require agencies to post online virtually every phone call and email by an agency employee about a proposed rule. If my colleagues are serious about improving the transparency of the regulatory process, we should work together on a bill that actually accomplishes that goal and doesn't attempt to gag an agency and its employees from communicating with the public and those parts of industry or other parts of the economy that could be affected by the proposed rule or regulation. I also am here on behalf of the minority in opposition to H.R. 1009, the OIRA Insight Reform and Accountability Act. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that this bill would increase direct spending by $3 million and reduce revenue by another $2 million. The CBO estimates that the bill would cost federal agencies an additional $20 million in administrative costs. The reason the bill costs so much money is because it does not simply codify an executive order as its proponents would suggest. The bill would require independent agencies for the first time to submit rules to OIRA for review. Independent agencies such as the FCC, the SEC, CFPB do not currently have to get the approval of the White House for regulations they issue. Congress designated independent agencies to be just that, independent. This bill would enshrine in law the ability of the White House to engage in political interference, potentially, with those agencies. We wanted to cordon them off from that kind of political interference. The bill also omits critical phrases from Executive Order 12866 that ensure that OIRA reviews do not contradict existing laws. For example, the executive order requires agencies to provide the costs and benefits of alternatives to a proposed rule, and I quote, unless prohibited by law. The bill does not include that exception, and we have not yet heard why it does not include that language. It's unclear how the bill would impact laws that prohibit agencies from considering costs when setting public health standards. The bill also would give OIRA the ability to endlessly hold up rule makings. And maybe that's the intent. Under Executive Order 12866, the administrator of OIRA has 90 days in which to review a rule, and that period can be extended one time for an additional 30 days. This bill would allow OIRA to extend its review, and I quote, for any number of additional 30-day periods upon written request by the administrator or the head of the agency. In other words, ad infinitum. The Congressional Budget Office stated in its cost estimate, and I quote, enacting H.R. 1009 could delay the issuance of some rules. I would call that an understatement. The bill gives the rulemaking agency the ability to deny OIRA's request that it is not realistic to think that an agency would refuse the White House's request to extend the review period. I urge the committee to adopt an open rule to both of these bills, but if the committee instead chooses to adopt structured rules, I would ask the committee to make as many amendments in order as possible to allow members to debate fully the impacts of these bills. In particular, I urge the committee to adopt my amendment to H.R. 1009 that would preserve the autonomy of the independent agencies I've just spoken about by exempting them from the provisions of that bill. And with that, I yield, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you all for your courtesy.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Paul, today, are comments kept by an agency, or is there any responsibility that an agency has to keep these for public review, to keep these for a period of time for their own use? Is there anything in today, the way anyone that's affected by this, how they operate?
Not within the current provisions. They may retain them for some period of time as they complete rulemaking, but there's nothing that requires that they maintain those, particularly not for public review. And the key issue here, in my opinion, Mr. Chairman, is public transparency in terms of the rulemaking process, what comments were made. And in response to my cohort's comments, 1004 addresses what it is the agency is saying as they make communication to whom and in what manner. Not saying they can't say anything. It's just, what are you saying? So the public is aware of the position you're taking, and discloses that. And that's important throughout the process, including retention of comments and disposition of those comments.
Do you envision that a agency, excuse me, might change the way they do business, allowing them to have a portal for information, unless they have that today, to where someone could say, I'm providing information that would be for or against, or here's where I am, and a form to fill out? Or do you anticipate that I could write you, email you, and that would be the form of transmission that then we would save and take into a tally?
Well, currently either can be used, and I would suggest that we preclude it because it may preclude some people in the public from participating. Mm-hmm. Some may not be comfortable with a portal, but they want to send an email. They want to send a letter. We want to encourage the general public to comment.
So you think an agency might, as a result of this, develop their own efficiency model, so to speak?
They certainly could.
Do you think that as this would be developed by an agency, that there would be a place where someone would be allowed to understand that my comments that I'm making would be shared with the public, and or that opt in or opt out to that based upon a certain customer, somebody who wanted to provide feedback?
I certainly believe that if an agency is being as transparent as we'd like them to be, they should be. That way that someone is even not certain about what they wish to say about it can review what comments are and whether they agree or not.
Yeah.
I think that transparency is what we're trying to achieve for the public.
So really what you're trying to do, if I get it, I think I fully support. I would like to see an agency not engaged in patting their own back or padding their numbers or encouraging an outcome. I would like to see them stand up on their own. I would like for it to be stated, is this proposed? Is this a final reg? You know, where it might be done. And perhaps more importantly, actually accepting from people their feedback. And then is there anything in here that then would require, upon the recommendation of a final rule, that the amount of traffic or feedback would be contained within some? Do they ever have to report about what kind of feedback they received?
There's nothing that requires that type of reporting at this point in time. It's not a bad concept.
I don't know that it is or not. I just asked.
Not that I know of at this point in time. I think that's left to agency discretion. But
we don't weigh and measure in my office the weight of requests. We probably do look at how many contacts we get. A lot of Jerry Conley's people have been calling my office the last couple of weeks.
I've heard some of those.
We acknowledge that.
I think the important thing we want to get across, especially with 1004, is that it simply require agencies to disclose that they've made the communication, what format it is, and who's making the communication. Yeah. And as you noted, in the waters of the U.S., communication was made, I would suggest under cloak of darkness, that by EPA to encourage a particular position rather than put out a notice of proposed rulemaking. And that is a fundamental difference, and government should operate transparently. That is, here's where we are, here's what we propose, what do you all think, and not then try to skirt things and try to gin up, as I said, comments. And that's a pretty interesting approach, let's put it that way.
Okay. Did you have a chance to listen to Mr. Conley and some specific feedback that he gave to us about some frailties or advice he had for us about, from his perspective, about this piece of legislation?
1004, I did listen to him, of course I would, my colleague. 1004, 1009, I did listen to his comments about the amendment he in particular has proposed. And that amendment was proposed at the committee level. It was, in fact, not supported at the committee level. Frankly, the OIRA administrator under President Clinton urged Congress to support extending OIRA review to the independent agencies. That, in fact, she wrote, our concern is that independent agencies are not typically engaging in the analysis that is going to be expected as a form of government best practice for regulatory agencies. So to suggest that somehow they should be immune to that type of oversight, even just coordinating with each other to avoid conflict, to look back at previous regulations, do they conflict, are they duplicative? That requirement should extend to all agencies, whether their administration is independent or not. And we've had a significant pretty Democratic administrators say that it should have been applied years ago. That was in 2011. So we're sitting here in 2017 still trying to achieve the same thing.
So really, it's what you think is more or less a good housekeeping opportunity and a fair chance to ask for feedback, but to receive it and then let the public know also.
I think if we achieve nothing out of understanding the elections in November of 2008, it's that the public is demanding to understand what it is the government is supposedly doing to help them, to understand where it comes from, what the desire is, what they're trying to achieve, and not suddenly be greeted by regulations they don't understand, they can't understand where they come from, and frankly are manipulated. And that's all agencies, including the SEC, CFPB, if you can get anybody to pronounce the acronym right, all agencies, not just those that are, what some people say are traditional agencies.
Well, I think this is an interesting opportunity to update it, and I'll be very interested to see if the administration provides us feedback about what they think about this. We are aware, you're aware, that the head of the OMB is not available yet. He has not been approved by the Senate, and I have not seen substance. When was that? Oh, last week.
He snuck up on us.
I knew he was there this weekend, but I did not know. Okay, well, I'm wrong. Well, I would assume any day that we will be hearing from the administration about their, what is called a SAP, Statement of Administrative Policy, because I think it will be interesting to see what they think about these two bills also.
Thank you, sir.
Much. Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, I have no questions. I just want to welcome our two colleagues up here to the Rules Committee. It's always a delight to have them, but then I'll yield back.
Good. Thank you very much. Ms. Slaughter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Mitchell, I just need to clarify a few things that I don't understand. 1004, the Regulatory Integrity Act. This calls for a lot of work to go over all those regulations from all those agencies. Who will be in charge of doing that?
And in 1004, each agency is responsible for putting out what their communication is, revealing that to the public. It's a function they have now. I would disagree. It's extensive work. It's simply disclosure.
The agency itself will determine if they are trying to seek publicity or
Under 1004, they're responsible for compliance. That's correct.
Do you think that would work?
Well, if it doesn't work to get them to self-report compliance, and we have a bigger problem on our hands than we're going to solve through any bill.
Since I frankly didn't know there was a problem here to start with on propaganda. Let me give you an example here. In February 13, 2017, Department of Energy posted an energy blog about wind power. And it said wind represents a major opportunity to provide power to highly populated coastal cities. Wind energy is affordable, and by 2050, the United States has the potential to create 600,000 jobs, save consumers $149 billion, and save 260 billion gallons of water by continuing to increase the amount of wind energy that empowers our homes, our schools, and our businesses. Do you consider that propaganda?
I'm sorry, who posted that? I apologize, Ms. Slaughter. I didn't hear
The Department of Energy.
Depends whether they're reporting a study or whether they're reporting their opinion. So what the question is the source
And who
of that.
determines that? Somebody else in the Energy Department?
My question for you was, what source is that from?
Department of Energy.
I know, but are they quoting a report that was done, as they commissioned, or are they reporting their opinion?
Well, what I need to know is how this bill would react to that.
Ms. Slaughter,
Once that's done, you have to wait until it's printed before then somebody else in that agency says, "Oh, you shouldn't have done that."
Well, what the rule
Yeah,
requires is that what the rule requires is simply that they make this communication, they publish notice that they made a communication, and the nature of it. That's what it requires. So
Doesn't the communication post that they made it?
if they made it on their site, yes, but if they made it on a separate site, such as a Water of the U.S., it does not. And that is the fundamental example. That's the crowning glory of rulemaking by stealth, is you post a rule and then you're off on another site posing to be something else, generating comments.
Is your intent here that they not post anything?
No, of course not, no.
That they not talk about?
No, of course not.
Mr. Connolly, you wanted to speak?
I did. I think you put your finger on exactly the dilemma with this bill. And the
A lot
gentleman...
of regulations come out
That's
from these
right.
agencies.
So the gentleman said it depends whose opinion it is or where it came
Exactly,
from.
right.
So what you and
But
I
it
might...
also depends on the opinion of the person who's going to determine whether that's propaganda or not.
presumably the regulation of the rule is predicated on analytical work. That analytical work, in this case, said it could produce 600,000 jobs. It's a positive thing. It's not just a cost to the economy. There's a benefit. The problem with this bill is that now puts this in, at the very least, a gray area where somebody could say, well, that's really an opinion and therefore can be construed as advocacy, and it's a violation of the law. So therefore, you can't provide it.
Well, now, it says it would save consumers $149 billion. Then we would assume that some kind of actuarial, some mathematical calculations went into that, right?
And I assume...
And you'd have to explain what they were?
That's right. And I assume some people who don't like regulation, period, would immediately claim that's an opinion and therefore advocacy.
You know, I think this might be a little redundant, Mr. Mitchell, but you know, that's up to everybody else to decide. On 1009, I'm really concerned about that because it's going to cost money. The Congressional Budget Office says that implementing the bill would increase administrative costs to IRA and federal agencies by a total of $20 million between 2018 and 2022. Such spending would be subject to the availability of appropriated funds. CBO estimates enacting the bill would increase direct spending by $3 million over the 2018 to 27 period and would reduce revenues by $2 million over the same period because the bill would affect revenues and direct spending, then the pay-go provisions then would apply. You know that, I'm sure.
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Okay, I wanted to be sure to point that out. And I'm also told that the agencies are already doing what you were asking in 1009. Is that, you're aware of that?
Well, I would disagree that all the agencies are doing that as outlined. They're certainly not issuing a report, and it does not apply at this point in time to the, quote, independent, end quote, agencies to which this does apply. Regarding your concerns with the cost, if in fact we approve the rulemaking process, which is the intent of the bill, $20 million doesn't cover the cost of the lights around this place for a week. So with all due respect, I think it's a minor cost to get a better outcome for the economy, for the citizens, for businesses.
You're right. I'd say we use this statistic a lot that according to CBS, it costs $24 million a week to run the House. And if you vote 59 times to replace with a health care bill you don't have, that's a pretty good waste right there, don't you think? I wonder what kind of law we should pass about conning the Congress with the idea that you have a bill when there's none exist.
I think, Ms. Slaughter, that next week you'll see a bill, while it may not be.
Well, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about last term. 59 votes to replace something that we didn't have. According to John Boehner. Let me say I'm quoting the former speaker when I say that.
As you well know, I with the term fresh meat around here, so I'm not culpable for what you may have considered to be past oversights and errors. I'll battle for you.
Hardly anybody is, Mr. Mitchell. Anyway, this is interesting because it does spend money. We ask an awful lot of federal employees, and I think almost every time we turn around, somebody wants to take away part of their pension or cut their salary again. To put these burdens on top of what they're doing already seems to me to be redundant, but I'd also like to ask unanimous consent to put in statements by public citizen.
Without objection.
And also a study here done by a bunch of concerned citizens, Union Concerned Citizens, PERG, Sierra, Safer, and about 100 other people, if I may. And Mr. Connolly, did you have anything else you?
If I may, I'd ask unanimous consent that a statement opposing the bills be entered in the record from the National Resource Defense Council.
Okay.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. I think it's interesting, Mr. Mitchell, you're up here suggesting something of a right way to run the government, and we'll find out what the administration thinks about this too, and we'll find out whether all presidents are the same or not, I guess.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think regarding the CBO score, the committee believes the costs in implementing this are worthwhile if, in fact, we improve the outcome of regulations issued by the federal government, that we limit the effect, that they're not duplicative, they don't conflict. The regulations annually compose billions of dollars of cost in the economy. So a $20 million expense to improve them is a relatively minor cost when we do achieve that. And I'm convinced we will. As you know, I'm from the private sector and dealt with these regulations every day. And at some point in time, as they used to say, we got to make the bad man stop.
Mr. Speaker, may I say one more thing, please, Mr.
Yes,
Chair?
ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. It's just in the fact that it's been pointed out the agencies are doing that already before they promulgate those. And I know that by law, they have to determine if it's cost-benefit analysis. I mean, that's been the law here for years. So they're basically doing what you want to do in this bill. Now, should they stop doing that and leave that to somebody in the agency that's going to make that decision so that you don't have to go through all that twice? It's redundant, isn't it?
I believe you know that's not a suggestion of either of these bills or myself personally. I think that...
I'm not blaming you for it, Mr. Mitchell. I'm just trying to understand.
I'm answering your
Okay.
question. I think that the example I mentioned earlier that the chairman mentioned, Waters of the U.S. is a poster child for regulation run amok, for an agency run amok. There are others. I could give you a list of them. This will at least make them accountable, make the process accountable, make it transparent.
Aren't you getting more regulation?
Absolutely.
You're regulating these agencies again, right? I mean,
Requiring them to go through a process they should all go through, and requiring transparency regarding their communication. So in fact, they have to be clear who they're communicating with, on what subject, and so long as there's clarity, they can proceed. That has not always been the case.
and there's the example that I gave from the Energy Department about wind power. I think if they absolutely know those things, and as far as I know, nobody's ever questioned the accuracy of them, it would seem to me to be almost an obligation for them to tell the citizens of the United States, we're working on it, and look what this is going to do.
There's a significant difference between the Department of Energy expressing their opinion from their analysis about a regulation or statute.
But it's not their opinion.
If I can complete,
Yeah.
their perspective, whatever term you want to put on it.
It could. I beg your pardon, because it could be their opinion that 600,000 people would be.
And an agency going off-site to a separate site that they're not naming themselves to generate particular comments. There's a meaningful and significant difference between the two, and that is what the 1004 addresses. There's a significant difference between the two, between the Department of Energy publishing their perspective, getting opinion or whatever, on their website and going out to a separate entity that they don't declare to the public.
Well, you know, it just occurred to me that you could probably save the whole thing at $20 million if you just have them say, this is in our opinion, this will happen. Wouldn't that do it for you?
That doesn't,
If that's what your problem is, that they're giving their opinion,
that doesn't address the...
that does not. Huh?
That does not address...
It seems to me it does, but we'll discuss it further. What do you say?
That's what happens when you sit on different sides of the aisle.
Oh, right.
Yes, ma'am.
It could be. We're always trying to save money over here.
Yes, ma'am.
We discussed that just yesterday.
Yes, ma'am, and the day before. Gentlewoman yields back time. Gentleman from Louisville, Texas, Dr. Burgess, does not seek time. The gentleman from Georgia, the gentleman from Alabama, the gentleman from Massachusetts.
I want to thank you both for being here. I've heard the words openness and transparency and accountability used a number of times, and I find it somewhat ironic that, that we can't get the president's taxes released. We can't get any accountability when it comes to all the many conflicts of interest that this president has in the White House. I mean, he's on a collision course with corruption, and nobody seems to care. We're slow-walking investigations into Russia connections. I mean, I go right down the list, and of all the things that we should be dealing with, and are all the things that seem to be of the utmost importance. I got to be honest with you. As much as I appreciate you both being here, this doesn't seem like it's what the American people are clamoring for. But be that as it may, I guess my question to Mr. Mitchell is there any reason why you have not requested an open rule?
Well, as you're well aware, sitting on the committee, in fact, the rules are determined by the...
Right, but oftentimes the chairman and the ranking member, Mr. Connolly, I heard his testimony that you make a recommendation. Sometimes they come up and say, we want a closed rule. I've heard that a lot. Sometimes they say we want, just to make a couple of amendments in order. I'm just wondering, if we're talking about accountability and transparency and openness, for once, it'd be nice to hear a Republican chairman come up here and argue for it and say, let's just have an open rule. I don't think it would take much longer to get the bill done. Certainly, there's nothing urgent that I can see is on the docket, but I just was curious whether maybe you might want to break the pattern and say, I think we should have an open roll.
How about if I break the pattern and give you a direct response to your question, which is not commonplace?
Okay.
I've been asked multiple times my perspective having joined Congress 6 weeks ago. And the thing I'm astonished by some days is the amount of time we spend on messaging votes that we know what the vote is, we know what the outcome is, yet we still want to spend the time that we spend doing that. It's astonishing. Well, let me finish if I can. You asked a question. All due respect, I get to finish. The reality is the minority has an opinion regarding the president's taxes and a variety of other things. It's been expressed in multiple ways, as you just did now. It doesn't change what we're trying to achieve here in Congress any given day, but it allows for messaging. And my comment to my colleagues in multiple places, including friends I've met in the freshman class across the aisle, is let's focus on doing our job to get things done and spend less time trying to score political points and messaging. So the reality is we ask for structured rules so we can deal with rules that we think are germane, are not strictly political, so we can move on to the next item to accomplish things which I was sent here to do.
Well, with all due respect, that's not a direct answer to my question. You know, and just because a Democrat offers an amendment doesn't mean it's purely for messaging.
I didn't suggest it was.
Any more than a Republican offering an amendment is really for messaging. I can make the case that 60 votes to repeal the Affordable Care Act was messaging, but I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt that that's what my Republican colleagues really believe. I mean, this is the people's house, and my opinion matters just as much as your opinion, and I represent as many people as you do, and I think at some point around here, we ought to act like that we're all elected by the people, and we ought to have an opportunity to be able to offer what amendments we want. And if you don't like them, you can vote against them. If I don't like your amendments, I'll vote against them. But I'm just saying at some point, if you want to promote collegiality and you want to promote the spirit of not, gut your votes all the time, maybe we ought to open this place up, Mr. Connolly.
We did vote against them in committee, sir.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but there may be some other people that are not on your committee that would like to, and just because you voted against the committee doesn't mean that's what the majority of the House believe. I mean, that's just the reality.
Just wanted to note it.
Yeah. Mr. Connolly?
Well, I just wanted to comment. I mean, I think your point about transparency is well taken. And I guess if I were in my friend's seat, I'd take the position he took with you in responding. The one has nothing to do with the other. But if we're preaching transparency, I just want to reiterate, on our side of the aisle, unanimously, our view was and remains that this bill does the opposite. It will have a chilling effect such that there will be less information, not more, because the lawyers within every federal agency are now going to have to make sure they're complying with the law, and they will always err on the side of caution. So don't say that. Don't offer that, because that could be construed as an opinion. And therefore, there'll be less information, not more. And I think perhaps that's the design of the bill.
That may be the point.
And with respect to the independent agencies, I find it interesting that my colleague would suddenly want to quote an Obama official. This is refreshing, and I'm looking forward to that over the next 4 years. Because, gosh, I don't remember them being invoked with authority over the last 8 years. But that, be it as it may. I would say I disagree with that official you cited, and Congress made them independent agencies for a reason and did not subject them to OIRA for a reason. And if this bill becomes law, you will compromise the independence of those agencies, which again may very well be the intent behind the law. So far from more transparency, I believe this will have a chilling effect to have less transparency, and it will compromise the independence of independent agencies.
Mr. Connolly, will you yield to me for just a second? Following that, I'm sorry, Jan. I'm sorry. I just, as you said that, it just occurred to me. We hire them to give us their opinion.
Yes.
That's what they do.
And we already have a law.
And it is their opinion. We base almost everything we do on those opinions.
And we already have a law.
What the heck are we doing with this bill?
Prohibits propaganda or lobbying.
Yeah,
for those agencies.
Talk about circular logic. I think we've been all the way around this. Thank you, Jim.
I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Well, I got a question. Did the agencies over the last year provide feedback about how many people gave public comment?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, what's the question?
Do agencies report public comment? How do we know what it is? I mean, all this is about is to say, we get a chance to see what the public comment is also.
Most agencies reply with, I think when they do the final rule, will post a total number of comments received, categorize them by general area.
Oh, so they do that now?
Most,
They
I will
do,
say most.
and you can go online and see the comments.
Most, well, that was a question.
Yeah.
So most do that. And then they try and characterize them for, against.
By topic, it depends on the
By
volume
top,
they
good,
receive.
okay. They, total, okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Judge?
thank you. Mr. Mitchell,
Sir.
I did not read Chapter 3 of Title 5 of the United States Code. And since I didn't, I'm asking for your wisdom with reference to the measure that you have offered, amending Chapter 3 of Title 5. What's the penalty if somebody doesn't do what you have requested with reference to amending the rule? What happens if the agency head or other person doesn't do what you're asking?
Well, Judge, I'm going to admit something. You've got me there. I'm not an attorney nor a judge, so I'm going to have to go back to the legislation. I could not answer that question for you, sir.
Right. I do find that missing in the legislation. I don't know whether we reprimand them or slap them on the back of the wrist.
I think we have to go back to the legislation it's amending.
Yeah.
I don't have that in front of me, sir.
It's kind of interesting. Before Mr. Collins leaves, I do want to just address something that he and I have whiplash after we just spent time on the floor with legislation. And I pick up from this particular legislation under period 2, the following language. The head of each agency shall publish the information required under paragraph 1A not later than 24 hours after a public communication relating to a pending agency regulatory action is issued, and shall maintain the public availability of such information not less than 5 years. And Doug, we were just down there arguing about not requiring people who are injured and employers to keep records for 5 years, and now we're up here getting ready to pass some legislation requiring agency heads to keep things for 5 years. I don't know where we are, but I think I get it, and I just wanted you to hear that, Doug, not so much for a response. But I think I get this whole thing, and I have a solution for us. Why don't we just pass a disapproval of all regulations and get on with it? Because if we're going to do this bit by bit, piece by piece, we will find ourselves in a miserable state at some point of just saying that we don't believe in any regulation. And my colleagues, eventually, I'm going to start asking them, point to me a regulation that you do believe in, because obviously we're about the business of destroying the regulatory process that has in many respects served this country well. If you think about food safety, we use water quality and air quality, and I cite to my personal experience in California as to why I didn't stay in California was because the quality of the air was not good. And I can only think, without knowing any regulation that came about, that there were regulations that caused the pollution that I confronted when I was a young man there to not be as severe. And like all of you, we represent areas where I represent farm territory. And the quality of the water is a continuing issue. And we have in the morning, we have an Everglades Coalition meeting where 16 counties are coming here. And all of them, every last one of them on the east and west coast of Florida, are concerned about the quality of the water. And I just find it interesting. And I want to just put one fine point on the legislation leaving a gap about what to do if the agency head doesn't do it. I'll tell you what to do, Mr. Mitchell, is do what we do around here. We order the Defense Department to give us a report in 30 days, and they never give us a report. We write the president, and we say to the president, you know, you should do this, that, and the other. And I can't tell you how many letters that have been left on Obama and Clinton and Bush's desk somewhere with somebody that didn't even pay me the courtesy of writing back and saying, I got your letter. You know, so I don't think it's a problem. I just pointed it out. And maybe if we read that section, we'll find out exactly what they do if they don't respond. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. By the way, I have just now received the statement of administrative policy from the Executive Office of the President.
Can I guess?
Budget, Washington, D.C. And I would
What did you say?
allow my, it says, please tell Louise, I said.
I thought he was going to ask me about time.
Mick said, by the way, the last time I was up there, Louise was very kind to me, and Jim McGovern went out of his way to ensure that I had a chance to speak clearly, and Judge Hastings was awesome. So Mick Mulvaney just really does appreciate it very much. Without objection, I'm going to enter this in the record. I have not read it, so I really don't know the substance. Yes, well, I can read a little bit. It says the administration supports the Scrub Act, the Regulatory Integrity Act, and OIRA Insight Reform and Accountability Act. The administration looks forward to working with the Congress on technical and other amendments to these bills. So there we go. So you ask things around here, Paul, and at some point you get them. Is there any other member of the committee that would seek to talk to our two witnesses on these two bills? Seeing none, I want to thank both of you very much for, as always, Jerry, I told you we enjoyed seeing you here, your insight. Paul, you did well enough to get invited back. We appreciate it very, very much. And if you'll please make sure you leave whatever you brought in writing for our awesome stenographer, we appreciate you very much. Okay, is there any other member of the body that would be interested in giving testimony to the Rules Committee concerning today's bills? Seeing none, this now closes the hearing portion for H.R. 1004, H.R. 1009. The chair will now be in receipt of a motion from the gentleman from Oklahoma, the young chairman, Chairman Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 1004, the Regulatory Integrity Act of 2017, a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill. The rule makes in order only those amendments printed in Part A of the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to an amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against amendments printed in Part A of the report. The rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instruction. Section 2 of the rule provides for consideration of H.R. 1009, the OIRA Insight Reform and Accountability Act under a structured rule. The rule provides for 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule makes an order as original text for the purpose of amendment, an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 115-4 and provides it shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against the amendment in the nature of a substitute. The rule makes in order only those further amendments printed in Part B of the Rules Committee report Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and unopponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in Part B of the report. Finally, the rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions.
You've now heard the motion from the gentleman from Oklahoma. Is there amendment or discussion to that gentleman from New York?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I need to do this because we want to put this in our collection of unfulfilled desires here. I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee grant H.R. 1004, H.R. 1009, each an open rule so that all members have the opportunity to offer amendments to the bills on the floor.
Good point. Discussion.
It is, isn't it? Yeah. Been a while. Last year.
Okay, seeing no discussion, the vote now be on slaughter amendment. Those in favor of slaughter amendment, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
No.
We need a roll
So
call.
gentlewoman asked for a roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Collins? Mr. Byrne? No. Mr. Byrne, no. Mr. Newhouse? No. Mr. Newhouse, no. Mr. Buck? Ms. Cheney? Yes. Ms. Cheney, no. Ms. Slaughter?
Yes.
Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings?
Yes.
Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis? Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk, will please do me a favor and tell me how
Mr. Burgess is
Tell me
here.
how Dr. Burgess is reported. I
Mr. Chairman?
apologize. If you could please tell me how Dr. Burgess is recorded.
Mr. Burgess is not recorded.
Would you please ask Dr. Burgess if he would choose to be recorded?
Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess, no.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Judge. Sometimes it's not always apparent to me when people walk in, and I do appreciate the help. That's only fair, and I appreciate it. Thank you. If the clerk will please. Is there any other member that has not been recorded that would wish to be recorded? Clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 7 nays.
The amendment's not agreed to for amendment or discussion. Gentleman of Massachusetts.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee strike the waiver of all points of order for H.R. 1009, which includes waivers of Cutco, statutory pay-go, and sections 303 and 311 of the Congressional Budget Act. And if I could just say one brief comment here. You know, as we said yesterday, this committee continually grants waivers to advance Republican proposals that do not comply with the rules and then hides behind those same rules when it comes to bringing forward Democratic ideas. So, Mr. Chairman, there are so many points of order against H.R. 1009 that there are almost too many to list. It violates, as I said, Cutco, statutory pay-go, Section 303 of the Congressional Budget Act, Section 311 of the Congressional Budget Act, and it even violates the majority's legislative protocol for discretionary authorizations. This pattern cannot continue, and this legislation has no business going to the floor. So I therefore urge the committee to adopt my amendment to strike the waivers of all points of order.
Thank you very much. Is there discussion? Any member wish to be heard? Seeing none, the vote now on the government amendment. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. Noes have it.
Ask for a roll call, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman asked for a roll call vote. Clerk will call the committee.
Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Burgess? No. Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Collins? Mr. Byrne? Mr. Byrne, no. Mr. Newhouse? No. Mr. Newhouse, no. Mr. Buck? Ms. Cheney? No. Ms. Cheney, no. Ms. Slaughter?
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings? Yes. Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis? Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 7 nays.
Amendment is not agreed to. Further amendment or discussion? Chair would like to, if he could, to please also acknowledge that I am aware of something that I did not previously provide the committee notice, and that is the gentleman, Mr. Buck, a member of this committee, is engaged in a Judiciary Committee markup and votes that are going on, and he asked for me to please, and Mr. Collins, which I was not aware of, but both have asked that we acknowledge that they were in Judiciary for important votes that would take place, and by acknowledgement, I would like for the committee to know that they are not here based upon that arrangement. Thank you very much. Okay. The vote will now be on the motion from the gentleman from Oklahoma. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
Ayes have it, ayes have it.
Roll call, please,
Don't
Mr.
want to
Chair.
ask roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Collins? Mr. Byrne? Mr. Byrne, aye. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Newhouse, aye. Mr. Buck? Ms. Cheney? Ms. Cheney, aye. Ms. Slaughter?
No.
Ms. Slaughter, no. Mr. McGovern? No. Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings? No. No. Mr. Hastings, no. Mr. Polis? Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk will report the total.
7 yeas, 3 nays.
The motion is agreed to, and accordingly, I will be handling this for Republicans
And Mr. Polis, if we can find him.
and Mr. Polis for
Minority.
Democrats. Please know that at this point, we have no scheduled meetings for the rest of the week. Is there any other business that needs to come before the committee during the week? Seeing none, we are now completed with our work.